I'm Alan Wartes, and this is ThinkRadio Presents ThinkBusiness. My guest today is scientist and entrepreneur Christopher Caskey.
Climate change is a big integral issue, and someone once told me that there's always resources to solve the big problems. I don't know if that's true, but we're putting climate right in the name to keep the focus, to say this is not just about producing a building material, which we do need, but it's about solving a big problem, or at least solving a small slice of a big problem.
Welcome to another great conversation on Think Business.
Think Business is made possible by funding from the ICE Lab at Western, supporting innovative business in the rural Southwest.
If you like ThinkRadio Presents Think Business, I know you'll enjoy the other shows in the ThinkRadio Presents family of podcasts. Think People, a celebration of just how amazing people can be. And Think Planet, conversations with thought leaders on important environmental issues. Subscribe to ThinkRadio Presents on iTunes and YouTube or wherever else you get great content. And don't forget to help us spread the word by liking our social media channels and sharing the content we post. We're grateful to have you in the conversation on ThinkRadio Presents.
My guest today is scientist and entrepreneur Christopher Caskey. He's a chemist, educator, and concerned citizen alarmed at the realities of anthropogenic climate change. He sits on something called the North Fork Coal Mine Methane Working Group in western Colorado. That's a groundbreaking assembly of mining industry representatives, environmentalists, and other public officials, all talking to each other about what to do about significant amounts of methane leaking from both abandoned and active coal mines in western Colorado. Tying all of that together, Caskey has founded the Delta Brick and Climate Company. His idea is simple. Stir together the byproducts of two existing environmental problems related to coal mining, add heat, and presto, you've got a product to sell that both is profitable and makes a difference in the world. And in the process, you also create climate credits that can be traded on the marketplace. With that, Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alan. Wonderful to be here. And I will say that we're not yet sure if it will be profitable, but that's the crux of my work right now, is building out the costs.
Well, you know that every entrepreneur in the world has to say that at startup.
That's
pretty
correct.
Much.
Yes.
So you're in good company with that statement right there. You know, I want to begin by actually betraying myself with a terrible stereotype that I hope people will forgive me for. But normally when you say to me the word chemist, you know, I think of somebody locked away in a windowless lab, white shirts, pocket protectors, you know, safety glasses, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Clearly that is not you.
No, but that was me once, and I realized that it was slowly killing my soul. So I need to get out and talk to real people and solve real problems. So that's one reason I became an entrepreneur, is to use the skill set that I have in chemistry to solve real world problems.
So what made you interested in chemistry to begin with?
You know, when I was in college, I knew that I was intelligent in the science and math world, and I said, maybe I should be an engineer. You know, in high school, maybe you don't always know what all the jobs actually are. It's like, well, I know that doctors, lawyers, and engineers exist, and maybe there's other jobs. But so I started taking classes in the sciences, thinking maybe medicine, maybe engineering, and I enjoyed the chemistry classes, and I just kept going down that road and eventually found myself with a major. So that's how that happened initially.
So what's the elevator pitch reason why you enjoyed chemistry? What was it about that attracted you?
You know, it's the scale of the interactions. So biology was too big and sloppy for me, and physics was too small and rigid for me. But chemistry, there's some space for creativity and a really just interesting molecules and electrons. I'm into that.
So long as you don't blow up the lab.
Yes, which we've not done to this point.
And, maybe you'll blow up the brick factory at some point and check that off the list too, but let's hope not.
Yeah.
But, a large number of people also think of chemists as, I'm sorry to say it, a part of the problem of how we got into the mess that we're in. Do you agree with that? I mean, do you think there's something inherently sort of tainted about chemistry as we've practiced it?
I would say as we've practiced it for most industries, there is a real problem. And philosophically, I think that problem is greed. And what we have in all of our industries and all of our skill sets are tools. Like all of medicine is a tool which can be used to help people or can be used for cruelty. All of chemistry is a tool where we can use it for good or we can use it for ill. And I don't want to generalize about chemistry as a profession, but we certainly haven't been good enough about, I guess I am generalizing. We have not been good enough about the ethics and about our decisions, especially when the profit driver and greed starts factoring in.
And yet, here we are facing a lot of the consequences that come from that kind of mindset. And we're turning to science, to chemistry, to biology, to physics as sources of healing, sources of reparation, sources of rehabilitation for some of these problems. You're one of those people looking to science to help solve some of these problems.
Yes, that is the goal, certainly.
And do you think that's do you think that there are more and more and more people like you that are starting to sort of hit the brakes on science as it has been done? And I shouldn't say science like that's one thing. Applied science, the way it has been done in the hands of some.
Yeah.
Is this a mindset that's taking over to sort of hit the brakes and back up and say, wait a minute, how can we redo how we think about?
I don't know that it's taking over, but it's certainly gaining momentum.
And why do you think that's true?
I think that as information's been more available, we have seen the scales of the challenges that we're facing. And as a society, and especially as young people, we've realized that the burden's on us. It's not, we can't kick it down to our kids to solve some of these longer term societal problems. So I think there's a lot of people around my generation that really these challenges resonate and we're ready to go and tackle them.
Well, the mother of all challenges these days seems to be climate change. Your company has the word climate in the title.
Right in there.
So this is something that clearly you've spent a lot of time thinking about. What is it in particular about climate change that has you so concerned?
Well, I love skiing for one thing. And so I got it. Another reason to answer your question that I got into chemistry was because I love the outdoors and because I recognize that environmental challenges, which are frequently chemical in nature, are affecting when I go hiking in the Grand Canyon, how hot it is, how much water there is, or when I go skiing, when the snow melts, or if there's dust on snow events. And climate change is a big integral issue. And someone once told me that there's always resources to solve the big problems. I don't know if that's true, but we're putting climate right in the name to keep the focus, to say this is not just about producing a building material, which we do need, but it's about solving a big problem, or at least solving a small slice of a big problem.
And well, to riff on that quote that you just said, you're not sure if it's true or not, that there's always resources to solve big problems. In 1999, Paul Hawken and Amory Lovins and L. Hunter Lovins wrote a book called Natural Capitalism.
Okay.
And the subtitle was Creating the Next Industrial Revolution. And essentially, one of the main ideas of that book was that environmental protection and rehabilitation will happen as soon as it becomes profitable. And it reminds me of what you just said. That is that's where the resources come from. Do you agree with that?
So, yes, like capital is very good at chasing itself and growing itself, and there's intelligent people and market mechanisms that make that happen. And so I think that not having read that book, though, ought I?
Yeah, I think you should.
Great.
Yes.
All right.
It's well, I will say that at the time it caused a little bit of a splash because there were a lot of people in the environmental community that didn't like to pair the words natural and capitalism. They felt that was an oxymoron. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to ask you, now that you've launched an entrepreneurial effort to do good in the environmental realm, what do you think about that and the idea that these two things aren't mutually exclusive?
Yeah, I think it's the responsibility of the government to tweak the market landscape in such a way that the ball rolls towards positive outcomes for the environment. And that might mean regulating how much methane and oil and gas production is allowed to emit. That might mean putting a tax on carbon. That might mean a cap and trade scheme for greenhouse gases that my company plans on selling into. And when those are clearly profitable, money and solutions follow that. But the environmental community of which I'm a part is rightly reticent to just purely put a numeric value on, say, a free-flowing river or a species that may or may not go extinct and may or may not have economic use to us as people. And that's there's non-monetary worth there, and I don't want to have just a spreadsheet that shows what species we're going to think about saving and what aren't worth our time. But I do But I do want a spreadsheet that says, hey, we know that a ton of carbon dioxide causes $40 of damage or $100 of damage to the economy in the future, and we should incentivize at that level to remove that ton of carbon dioxide.
Yeah, but I got to call you out there for a second because that sounded not very much like capitalism, but more like interventionism. I mean, when you use words like incentivize, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about putting a market mechanism in place, such as a cap and trade scheme, to say, hey, this is doing damage, and there is intervention there. This is doing damage, so let's let the best idea win in terms of how to mitigate that damage. Not simply saying you can't emit that ton of CO2, because if you're a brewery, your yeast burp out CO2, and we enjoy beer. But
not likely to go away anytime soon.
Yeah. So let's not say, hey, you can't brew or you must capture that CO2, which is really difficult. But say, hey, there's a disincentive to release CO2, and so if we can come up with a solution, then that solution has monetary backing behind it, because it alleviates that disincentive. So,
but there's also an incentive for an innovative entrepreneur to figure out how to capture the CO2 that's not terribly difficult or expensive.
Exactly. And there's easier sources and harder sources of CO2.
Yeah.
So that's why I say it's still capitalism, because you can go chase the easier sources with the best technology available instead of a harsh regulation towards, yes, do this, no, don't do that.
Yeah. Well, so in essence, is this what your business is all about? Becoming a part of this next industrial revolution that Hawken and others pointed to?
I think so. And the largest emerging commodity right now is greenhouse gas offsets. And if you look at the projections for how we're going to not hit 2 degrees C of warming, they involve large amounts of what academics call greenhouse gas management, which is capturing CO2, pumping it underground, turning it into rocks, turning it back into fuels, all sorts of various technologies. But it's a big emerging industry if we're going to avoid real negative consequences.
And so some of the coverage that I've seen recently suggests that when you listen to this conversation at the surface, you think it's really just all about turning off the sources of CO2. But that's not the entire story.
That's not the entire story. we will need not only to turn off most of the sources, and to be clear, our challenge fundamentally is an atmospheric chemistry challenge. So I can be a little bit energy agnostic, where it doesn't matter if we have solar panels or coal power plants, but what matters is what comes into the atmosphere. So if you have a coal powered plant with a capture facility, then I'm energy agnostic, and that's all right. But I got off topic. What was your actual question?
Well, just the idea that it's not enough to just curtail the amount of carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere, that at this point we've really got a problem of, and for entrepreneurs like yourself, an opportunity to think about how do we get some of that excess carbon dioxide back out?
Yeah. So the best projections are already showing that we're past 1.5 degrees C of warming. And that's not warming that's occurred, but that's warming that will occur because of the CO2 that's in the air now. So it's like if you pull a blanket across yourself during a warm day, you don't feel that heat immediately, but you're out in the sunshine and it's going to take a couple minutes and suddenly you're hot. So we know that our blanket is thick enough that we're going to get hot in the next few minutes, in the analogy, and years in reality. So we know that we have at least 1.5 degrees C, and we keep adding blankets. And so everyone expects that we will add too many blankets, that we'll need to not just stop adding blankets, so we have to start taking them off. So that means removing CO2 from air by one way or another.
And based on your expertise, is that still in the realm of science fiction, or are these technologies emerging now and it's doable?
Yeah, they're emerging now. The best one, in my opinion, is plants. They're really good at taking CO2 out of the air.
An ancient technology.
But there's a number of different ways, and they're all very scientifically sound. It's just that economically, it's difficult. It's diffuse. It's CO2 is in the parts per million in the air, which would be a good gold deposit would be in the parts per million. But CO2 is not worth as much as gold, so it's not worth taking out economically. Anyway. Not yet.
Not yet, but this is the conversation we're having, is that at what point might it become profitable, legitimately profitable, to invest your money there?
Yeah.
Well, so let's turn to your operation then.
Sure.
You basically identified two problems and thought, how can I play these against each other? Describe that.
Yeah. So the two problems that Alan mentioned are, one, we have sediment clogging an irrigation reservoir here in western Colorado. And this is a problem all over the world, but it's especially potent in the western United States. And it's especially potent if the dam where the reservoir is built on a creek called Muddy Creek, because true to its name, Paonia Reservoir is just filled up with mud, and it's quite a problem for operations. It's actively clogging the outlets, and the storage has been lost, which is shortening the growing season.
And this reservoir is here because it supports agriculture?
Yeah. So in western Colorado, we have a bunch of agriculture. We have really beautiful farms and ranches and a lot of vineyards. So this is in the North Fork of the Gunnison Valley. I believe it's the largest concentration of organic farms in Colorado. I don't know if that's true. And there's a bunch of vineyards. But it is a mountain desert transition zone, and almost all the precipitation comes in winter. And then if you want to have a farm, you need an irrigation canal, and you need storage backing up that canal so that you can irrigate in August and September. The mud clogging up the reservoir causes less storage, which means there's less water available. And that's just as climate change is really lengthening the season where you need irrigation and making hotter days. Trees cool, or plants, including trees, but including crops, cool themselves by drawing water into their roots and sweating it out their skin, just like we do. So the irrigation's important, and it's especially important as climate change makes it hotter.
Well, and projections are that climate change will also reduce the available water supply over the next few decades by up to 20, 25, 30%.
Yeah, and that's a space where people still argue quite a bit, because predicting that is hard, but certainly it's going to make snowpack go down because more of that precipitation will be in rain. And then depending on where you are in the West, it's probably getting drier.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you've got a supply of mud.
We have a supply of mud
that you need to do something with.
Yes, but we are rebranding this mud as high-quality clay.
I see.
Because,
okay. My mistake.
Yeah, it is. It is a high-quality clay, and that's fantastic and fortunate for us. To make ceramics such as brick and tile or terracotta warriors or toilets or whatever you want, the formula is simply clay plus heat, and we have heat available in an abundance as well. And that is in the form of waste natural gas that's leaking out of coal mines in the area. So traditionally, this town was coal mining and agriculture is what they've been doing forever. And by forever, I mean for 150 years. Of course, the Utes owned it before that. So we have this coal that's saturated with natural gas, and that gas originated with the coal. It all started as plant matter, and it died and got compressed under layers of earth, and some of that plant matter turned into coal and some of it turned into gas. And so when they mine the coal, they vent that natural gas because you don't want underground explosions. That's very reasonable. But that gas going to the atmosphere is a waste, and it is a source of pollution.
And this gas is very different, at least in magnitude, from carbon dioxide. We're talking about methane.
Yeah, so it's mostly methane.
Also a greenhouse gas.
Yeah.
But with a different sort of character.
Yeah, methane is a quite a bit stronger greenhouse gas than CO2, and it doesn't last as long in the atmosphere, but it traps, over the course of the first 20 years, if you released a certain amount of CO2 and the same amount of methane, you'd get 84 times or 86 times the warming from the methane that you do from the CO2. And the actual number isn't important. It's 84 or 86, and I intentionally don't remember it because the point is it's bigger.
Yeah,
and
by a lot.
By a lot, yeah.
Yeah. So capturing this wasted resource, as a lot of people want to call it, is about more than just putting something to work.
Yeah.
It's about stopping it from doing what it does in the atmosphere.
Exactly.
And so you saw these two things. And literally in the North Fork Valley, they're side by side.
Yes, we have a fortunate situation where they're just a couple miles apart. So the reservoir challenge and the methane challenge. So so we can just point them at each other and we can create products that people want. So as an entrepreneur, I've said, all right, there's these two challenges, but can we make something that people actually want? You'll notice there's not a lot of houses being built out of brick anymore, so the market's probably going to be tiles and pavers and maybe some custom architectural elements.
Mm-hmm. Well, and appealing to a segment of the market that is interested in knowing that the pavers they put down took methane out of the atmosphere.
Yeah, local, organic, gluten-free. It's the good stuff, certainly.
Yeah. Well, one of the problems with methane capture, as I understand it, having listened to some of the conversations about this, is methane is leaking in hard-to-reach places.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to get it to market.
It is.
You got to build pipelines, which is a whole other environmental problem.
Pipelines are,
or train lines, or you know, whatever mechanism you can think of to get it to market. And then what? You're still perhaps a long way from anywhere that wants it.
Yeah.
So is your plan to sort of co-locate these operations where the methane actually is, so you kind of eliminate all of that? Is that something that is scalable? Can you imagine that being something that people do elsewhere?
Yeah. So the first answer, or the answer to your first question is yes. We want to put the factory on one of the old coal mine sites, and the reason for that is moving the methane is expensive because you have to build a pipe. Communities don't necessarily like pipes in their backyard, and the coal mine is already an impacted industrial area. So that's good. We'll move the mud, most likely in trucks, to the coal mine, and we might have to move the methane down the hill a little bit because it leaks out of the old vent holes, it leaks out of the old mine shafts themselves, and the whole geology settles because you remove a layer of the mountain. when you take the coal out, and then the rest of the mountain settles down on top of it. So there's all sorts of cracks and fissures that occur when that settling happens, where the methane's coming out of. So you find your favorite, you put a straw in there, which looks like a normal oil and gas well, and then you pump on that gently. And you pump enough to pull the methane towards yourself, but not to draw in atmosphere from every other crack or hole that exists, because you won't be able to find and plug them all. And then you take it to your facility.
And is this an engineering challenge that you've got to solve, or that others have solved and you're just going to now come in and ride on their shoulders?
There are a few experts in the world on coal mine methane, and one of them is based in Denver and has already done a project in the North Fork Valley. So we're going to partner with them. Tom and Evan, that's you guys.
Don't recreate the wheel. So the next phrase that I want to throw at you is one that anyone who has tried something like this is well aware of: regulatory hurdles. What do you face to get all this? I mean, starting with dredging mud out of a reservoir, that can't be something that you just, back a pickup up and start hauling away mud.
Well, that's what I've done so far, and I've probably broken some laws just doing that.
Okay, well, we won't tell anyone.
All right. Yes, there's a lot of regulatory hurdles. So the reservoir is owned by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, so that's federal. It is operated by Fire Mountain Canal and Reservoir Company, and they are a private irrigation company, and it is located in a state park. So we have a lot of different people that we need to talk to.
Not to mention the citizens of Paonia.
And a great town of Somerset. And if you disturb a water of the United States, you have to talk to the Army Corps of Engineers. So I'll certainly need an Army Corps permit, and we're in the application process with them. And there's just a lot of stakeholders, like where the reservoir's in a fairly narrow canyon. Where do you even take the mud out of? There is a boat ramp, but we don't want to use that on an industrial scale for trucks pulling mud out. So we might be cutting another roadway, or using an old roadway that was there before the dam was there and recommissioning it. But there's a lot of steps.
Which is kind of how we got to the place where we are. There are always consequences when you undertake a project.
Absolutely.
Whether that project was driven by greed or by the desire to clean up after others, like your operation envisions.
And there's going to be, you can't do anything without impacts, as you said. There's going to be truck traffic. There's going to be impacts to the mountain. If we end up pulling gas from another site where it's not already being harvested, we're going to go up on a mountain, which is elk habitat and deer habitat, and we're going to need to bring a pipeline down, and that's going to be an impact. And we'll work with the local conservation groups to do that as intelligently as possible, but nothing is a pure wins all the way across the board.
Well, speaking of local conservation groups, then, have you been in conversation with them already? What's their temperature?
So the whole reason this project came up, or that I'm involved in it, is Delta County and Gunnison County, where both of the mines are, or all the mines are all on the border of Delta and Gunnison County. There's been dozens over the years, and there's 3 that exist right now. And those mines, so Delta County and Gunnison County got a stakeholder group together that you mentioned in the intro, the North Fork Coal Mine Methane Working Group, and so it's governments, state, local, federal, it's conservation groups, it's coal mines, it's other people with necessary expertise, and I got invited because I am on the board for the Western Slope Conservation Center, which is based in Paonia, and I got on their board because Paonia is an area that's near and dear to my heart, and I vacationed there, and I started volunteering, and when you volunteer, they keep asking you to do more, and if you don't say no, you end up on the board. So I've been their representative on the Front Range. I live in Denver currently, and so we got this working group together, and we're just trying to figure out what to do with the natural gas, and it became pretty apparent that cleaning it up and putting it in a pipeline was not going to be economic. And generating electricity out of it might be economic, but the grid is pretty saturated with generation, so we don't need that capacity. And so it became clear we should flare this gas, just burn it to mitigate the climate impacts, change the methane to CO2. You still release CO2, but it's 80 sometimes less bad. And there's other toxic components of the gas that get eliminated by burning. So this is the only time you're going to hear conservation groups saying, let's get big machines up on the mountain and light stuff on fire, because that really is what we need to do from an atmospheric health and atmospheric chemistry standpoint. So if you're doing that, you're generating carbon offsets that you can sell on California's cap and trade market or similar. And functionally what that offset is it's some brewery who it's not worth their time to capture their own CO2, paying us to do a climate mitigation strategy that's way easier and more cost effective than what they would have to do.
And it doesn't matter to the atmosphere where that comes from.
And it doesn't matter to the atmosphere. It's all one atmosphere. California has a lot of internal debates about whether credits from Colorado should count, and I'm happy to say that at least for now they do count, and they will for years to come. So but it's a funny space for a conservationist to be in, because there will be negative impacts to wildlife habitat resulting from this mitigation, but it's really worth the trade-off in my opinion.
Well, and that represents, in my view, a step forward in the conversation, where we're all starting to realize, no, there are impacts no matter what we do.
Yeah.
Let's just choose them wisely.
Yeah.
So I applaud that effort. From the point of view of entrepreneurialism, though, one thing that strikes me about your story is that, you're a conservationist, you're an environmentalist, but you're also an entrepreneur, and there you were at the table when this idea came up of, okay, the best thing we can do is just flare this gas.
Mm-hmm.
And you were there listening to this, and half of you had on your conservationist hat and the other half had on your entrepreneurial hat. And the entrepreneur said, well, if we're going to burn it, let's do something with it anyway.
Yeah, and I simplified several months of meetings there.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I did literally have two hats at one meeting, because I am there representing the Western Slope Conservation Center, but I presented on anything a chemist can do with natural gas. And at the time, I was faculty in chemical engineering at Colorado School of Mines. And so I brought a School of Mines hat and said, when I wear this hat, these are all things that are technically possible. And my other hat might want to veto some of those, because if we're talking about making a chemical facility, our whole economy from a chemistry and plastics standpoint is all oil and gas based, and especially gas based. Mm-hmm. So we could put a plastics facility up there or make some nasty stuff, but we shouldn't.
That's not the idea.
Yeah, it's not the idea. So,
but the point that I'm trying to make, and this show is called Think Business. Okay, we're talking to people who could be in similar position at some point. Maybe they're conflicted, but be at the table. That's where the ideas are happening.
Mm-hmm.
But you think of something like a working group. Typically, that's policymakers and politicians, but stakeholders need to include entrepreneurs. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. Yeah, and because that's where the thorny problems are, and we have a lot of entrepreneurs that do things that don't matter, and you can make a new phone app so that you can watch your refrigerator, but I don't care about those. Mm-hmm. And so entrepreneurs should be showing up at these policy discussions, and policy makers should be talking to entrepreneurs, and that's where government wants to get out of the way and let business do business. So they should be talking from
How about
the
we
start.
talk to each other?
Yeah.
Yeah, and really that's the nexus that is the birthplace of natural capitalism. If such a thing can exist at all, it will be because entrepreneurs get in the conversation and policymakers let them.
Yeah. Yes,
Chris,
I think so.
Exciting stuff.
It is, yeah. And I want to give a shout out to the North Fork Coal Mine Methane Working Group and everyone who participates in that and put it together. It's been a productive thing, and I think we can get some real wins out of it.
I hope so. Thanks for dropping by.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. Join us next week for another great conversation on Think Radio Presents Think Business.